lead innovation and finance think tank led by Stanford lead alumni. Thanks for joining. And we started to have this speaker series event, inviting distinguished speakers and talk about what is happening around in different parts of finance and area innovation and how that can be applied to other regions and areas as well. So today we're so honored to invite with Marwan Xerxes and Geneva Capital. And thank you for joining. And yes, I'll hand over the mic to Marwan to start the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sashio. And as you just said, our guest today is Xerxes Bhote, who runs a very specialty kind of equipment leasing fund with the name of Geneva Capital, based in the North Shore here in Chicagoland. And it is operated under a HaaS model, a hardware as a service business model. And it is an asset-backed, tax-efficient fund that create returns through residual valued equipment and compounding the lease stream. So without further ado, let's welcome our guest, Xerxes. Xerxes, thank you for joining us. Please tell us about Geneva Capital, how it started, and maybe probably tell us about yourself initially.
Sure, great. Well, without boring you too much, as we alluded to, Bill and I go back to the Chicago Mercantile Exchange back in 1984 when I graduated from CU. I've known him forever and a day. I spent 35 years with Credit Suisse First Boston, trading fixed income options, working with pension funds and portfolio management, utilizing options as a strategic investment. Fast forward 35 years, and I decided to move on from that business. It was kind of like it was getting to the point where the whole compression of commissions and things of that nature just made it somewhat stagnant. And I didn't want to be in a waning area. I wanted to, waxing versus waning type of environment. We felt that the momentum was here. I was introduced to the concept of utilizing equipment to finance in a fund package, whereby the investors actually take advantage of the depreciation assets, like we talked about, that's non-correlated. And essentially what it did was, from my basically on and off 35 years of being involved in some form of hedge funds and portfolio management, I thought, well, here's an asset class that's somewhat untapped. It's only really taken advantage of by the GE Capitals, the CDW leasing companies, groups like that. But why couldn't we shrink that down to a point where the average investor could get involved? So I ended up raising a little bit of money on my own, mainly my own money, friends and family, to just prove the concept. We started this in 2019, and we had the ability to purchase about $1 million worth of equipment and lease it. And with that lease stream, we took the proceeds and we reinvested it. Well, one thing led to another. We started a second fund, we started a third fund, and we now have $9 million that's out in the public domain, fully deployed into equipment such as MRI machines, SCADA equipment for oil and gas and water wells. We have robotic machines that we use for utility companies that have massive solar farms that need to keep the grounds serviced. Right. So instead of paying $150 an acre to have a labor force come in with gas lawnmowers to service the plot, these machines come in that are fully solar charged, all battery operated, fully GPS mapped into the system and cut on behalf of the manufacturer that provides this service for a utility such as Con Ed or a Georgia Southern, things of that nature. So they came in and said, well, look, we can't afford to just lease these machines out and take the upfront capital cost of the equipment.
Okay.
We said our solution is to come in, we can purchase that equipment on your behalf, you can lease it to the Con Eds of the world, and then from that stream that comes in, you pay us. And at the end of a 3-year lease, which is 100% amortized, we will collect not only that stream, but we'll also then allow you to purchase that equipment back at a percentage to be determined. It either could be a fair market value lease, it could be a capital lease at say 20% or 30%. And so there's a degree of flexibility that Geneva provides that a typical bank wouldn't. We have other verticals, such as we're involved in the mass spectrometer space. So think of metallurgy and the use of essentially DNA for metal. So we've got customers out there. They have customers such as Stanley Tool Works, Los Alamos Labs. Ironically enough, Stanford is in process to get a unit. They've been doing their testing already. In fact, they had a battery operation going on in Stanford, and they said, okay, we're going to give you a sample and you tell us what's in it. Kind of they were testing this group. They came back with the results, and part of the results showed X percentage of aluminum. And they said, aha, we got you. We have no aluminum in there whatsoever. And they said, well, let's go look at your process. How did you go about giving us the sample? And they talked to the technician that sent it, and they said, well, after we laid the battery on top of the foil so that we could seal it up in the packaging for you, we sent it off. And they said, well, there you go. Literally, the aluminum leached into the battery sample. And when they tested it, they showed it. So therefore, they realized that part of their processes weren't proper and that they had to kind of fix that protocol. So this is these are the types of companies that we like to get involved in. They're highly sophisticated, specialized pieces of equipment. They're in industries that have a certain need for this type of unit, and it's something that's kind of repeatable in their future. And so our whole feeling was, we like this kind of specialty niche area that isn't really kind of there for the buying public. You know, we're not buying laptops, we're not buying CPUs, we're not buying bulldozers or forklifts that the equipment gets used and then beat up and then is worth nothing at the end of the term. And so with this model in mind, we've actually also recently, in the last year and a half, we started getting phone calls because GE Capital is getting out of the leasing business. They're servicing. So we're going in and we're actually buying MRI machines for existing practices. I mean, maybe not hospitals, but we're going with existing practices.
Right. That's great. So you found the gap in the market and you just went there and took advantage of that. Simply put, you had to create your own solution and you fitted it specifically to something that gives you the long-term return. In my personal opinion, I really believe that this is a very innovative solution. It's not really probably inventing something from scratch, but you really have created a new process. These salvaged machines that you purchase and you deploy with the relatively high salvage value that you mentioned, the residual value. Can you redeploy them? Do you resell them? What do you do with them if you have that option of repurchasing them from the vendors?
Yeah, well, so it depends on the specific piece of equipment that we're talking about, and it depends on what relationship we're carrying with either the vendor or with the direct client. So in the example of a practice that needs an MRI machine, we created a fair market value lease. And we priced it fairly high on an effective rate basis on a 60-month lease. And we did our homework on each of these machines. So we went to 3 different resellers and we said, do you have a unit similar to this that's 5 years old? And what's the value of that piece of equipment? And obviously during the height of the pandemic, these pieces of equipment are still worth 80 cents on the dollar. Historically, they're worth about 55 cents on the dollar. What we did is we said, okay, based on the price that we want these people to pay on this machine, we're going to price it as if we're only going to collect 30 cents on the dollar. And utilizing that conservative model, we've still able to generate returns of about 14.5%, 14.4%. But that takes into account a reoccurring reinvesting basis, right? So in theory, if you have $1 million of equipment that's deployed and you're collecting $30,000 a month, at the beginning of year 2, you actually can invest a total of $1.36 million into the investment stream. Therefore, for increasing your net and gross returns by that 36%. And then in the second year, you do the same thing, and so on and so on and so on. So in one way, it's kind of a perpetual model at the same time. There isn't a start date and an end date. There's certainly a start date, but the end date is somewhat perpetual. So at the end of 3 years, or 5 years, depending on the piece of equipment, when that equipment comes due, you collect that stream from the residual value, and you reinvest that along with all the prior proceeds. So that's kind of the innovation in terms of the financial aspect of it.
Right.
That isn't normally done. That's really kind of only done by the GEs of the world. Meridian is another big leasing company. And those companies are doing it for really large dollars. But the banks don't do that. You know, the banks just kind of lend on the balance sheet. And, you know, they have pretty much a dollar buyout lease, or they have something very strict policy wise, whereas we're a little bit more flexible in terms of how we look at things.
Okay, amazing. I mean, I as I listen to you, I think of the accounting treatment as an accountant of what you said, and which Sashio as well, you know, asked the question, how does that apply on other jurisdictions or regions? I mean, I think for the US GAAP, the generally accepted accounting principles, if it is an operating lease, you could put the lease commitment on the side of the assets, and you have to disclose a liability for the amount on the lease plus the interest. On IFRS, and this is for you, Sashio, I think the treatment is straightforward. You have to put the asset for the use of the leased asset as a lessee, but at the same time, in terms of the interest only that you could put on the liability side, you cannot really accrue a liability for the amount that you are committed to pay for the lessee. In the United States as well, we can transfer that from a capital expenditure into operating expenditure, which is the tax benefit also. So I think probably looking into this from a deeper, probably jurisdiction or regional kind of situation might result in a different tax benefit or maybe accounting treatment. But you know, I hope this is kind of answers the question that Sashio had raised. Can you, I mean, you explained the mechanics of the lease. I had a question really prepared about here. Can you tell us about what you think the main challenges that you as an entrepreneur, and allow me to reference you as an entrepreneur because you launched your own business and you know, created everything from scratch. Can you tell me some of the main challenges as an entrepreneur or as an industry or as a company, Geneva Capital, facing or had faced probably initially? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So, you know, the first challenge is to talk to people and say, this isn't what I think I can do. You need to prove it, right? So really fund one was representative of myself, putting my money where my mouth was and showing people and demonstrating to people that I can do this. So here's $1 million example. Here's the equipment that we've bought. Now that we've proven it over 1.5 years, let's see who's interested in coming into the model. The next problem that you have is if I have a pool now of $5 million, for example, which is roughly what we had in the second fund, I have to now demonstrate to those $5 million worth of investors that I can find the deals. Now, we don't just look at any deal. I mean, I could have invested in crypto ASICs. I could have invested in cannabis pulverizing hemp machines. I could have many things that I looked at that I could have invested in. But our focus was on recessionary proof items, long-term secured assets, specialty enough equipment where we knew we had a backstop of where we could take that equipment. It, in a way, and it might sound corny, but I was an options trader, right? So I always knew that the portfolio's return was based on a risk-adjusted basis. I mean, anybody could buy something and hopefully it takes off and right. You can hit a home run. To me, it's about the risk-adjusted return. So the first thing I look at is, what's the probability that this person is a secured borrower? What's the probability that if something goes wrong, that I have my UCC filings and I can lean on that particular piece of equipment and I can get it back? And what's the probability that I can resell that and it's a liquid enough asset or a desirable enough asset that I can get it back? And so once I've answered those questions, then I have a really solid pool of deal flow that can be represented in that $5 million. So first and foremost, the number one problem is finding the quality deals that I would want to take, because, again, by the second and third reiteration, I and my family had put more and more money into this. And so that was kind of a big, like, an unknown. Do I even have enough bandwidth to take this now $5 million and put it into the market? We found out that we did. We put in another 4 million. We found those deals. And then it becomes a question of kind of I wear a deal flow hat or I wear a fundraising hat, right? So, I mean, right now, as we sit on this $9+ million worth of fully deployed assets, the existing customers in these verticals have the potential to come back to us and ask for more funding. So now your inherent difficulty isn't in finding quality deal flow. Your inherent difficulty is in raising more assets and having more conversations. So those are kind of the things that we think about as we grow. Outside of that, you've got other issues. Who is the law firm that you used on day one versus who's writing your LPAs on day last? Who's taking care of your accounting? Is it a professional outfit that you know and trust and they're dealing with it the right way? Do they know how to look at depreciation? And then the other thing that we did is, what about the underwriting? I mean, do not underestimate the power and the need for underwriting, right? So we contracted, I would not be able to fully ascertain the merits of any particular company based on simply looking at the balance sheet myself. That's not my expertise. So what I did is I hired who I think is one of the better people in the Midwest to do all of my underwriting, because that's one of those key components that allows you to judge that deal flow. Right. So those are the many aspects that I think about in terms of the, not necessarily pros and cons, but what keeps me up at night. Those are the things that I have to worry about and make sure that I've done a good job on. So right now, and these things ebb and flow. Sometimes we need more deals, sometimes we need more money. And that's kind of the nature of where we are to date.
This is a very concise and beautiful answer. Thank you for sharing again with us, because as you speak about that, it seems like it's the ultimate challenge, I think, for entrepreneurs, staying focused and the multiple hats that you have to wear, which is if you lose focus or sight of what you really want to achieve, could become a total disaster. But I think the 35 of experience that you have kind of speak for itself, and the ability of staying self-aware of your ultimate goal is your North Star. So thank you so much for sharing it. Tell us what is next for Geneva Capital? What do you think is the industry kind of situation right now, and where is it heading, and how is that going to affect Geneva Capital?
Right. So in most conversations that I have with vendors who have end clients, or manufacturers that are making their own equipment or utilizing some OEM to provide that equipment for their end client, everybody is talking about this reoccurring revenue model, utilizing hardware as a service. It's one thing to sell a widget. It's another thing to sell a serviceable widget that you can resell every year to the existing and new clients. If I use the example of our mass spectrometry company, right now, fairly new companies just getting their feet wet with the Department of Defense and the likes that we've spoken about, they're essentially giving them the tools for slightly over cost, or in that realm. Their long-term goal is, and in everybody we've talked to in the industry, is we don't want to sell our units. We only want to lease our units. We only want to create a reoccurring revenue model, a subscription model. There are many ways to talk about that or to express the same concept, which is the reoccurring methodology that allows that company to essentially get more out of every single customer. So with my robotic company out of Texas, I recently saw an article online about a competing robot, and they were only using theirs for like park district lawns and football fields. So fairly small acreage type of facilities. Mm-hmm. And they said in this article they will only lease their machines because they want to hold on to that customer, not for a single sale, but kind of forever, for a longer period of time. So even in this article, that he's literally online on a video stating, we want the reoccurring revenue model. Now that's partially due to the fact that they're still building the technology, and they're fine tuning any of the things that need to be done, because they're certainly not beta and first stage, but they're not complete products out the door that you would sell at Best Buy. It's not that complete. So they're still doing a lot of research on it, and they're getting a lot of data and input. But the bottom line is, the number one thing that we see is companies that want to use an OpEx model on behalf of themselves for their clients to create the reoccurring revenue.
And there is so many opportunity. Actually, I could see so many companies actually, they're switching from their existing business model to something along these lines, or probably even for startups that are trying to, you know, create a new segment of customers. So this is exciting and interesting kind of concept for sure. I think we are at the 30 minutes mark right now. I don't know, Sashio, do you want to open the mic, or should we call it?
Yes, I guess, and we also have some questions, chat from June, if it's okay.
Actually, I have a more pressing question.
Okay, go
I've
ahead.
I've been starting to look at some startups that are doing some really interesting. I didn't think I wanted to do hardware, but I realize in this climate, there's some really interesting new hardware that's coming up, right? And what I'm wondering is, this is a really interesting model. And I think for some of the companies that are developing really new things, like I've been speaking with a former NASA engineer, or engineer that used to work with NASA. He's developing a clean energy system with water and pneumatic pressure, right? Very interesting. He could put it on a truck, potentially. And I could see that these could be trucks that could be leased out, for instance, as a really interesting way to capitalize, right, his build, because especially for startups, they're constantly fundraising, and I think that's a stupid way to go. And for hardware companies, this could be really interesting. So what I'm wondering is, how often are you acquiring and looking at new machinery, right, and machinery classes? And if you're interested in talking further about these things, you know, I've seen Delta robot companies, although that founder is a little difficult to work with. But I'm also talking to another company that will enable more accurately printed flexible electronics. Sorry, it takes a little while to get out because I'm still learning about it, but I think it's pretty exciting, because right now the error rate on printed electronics is 60%, and they could greatly reduce that.
They should read my dad's book about Six Sigma, but that's another story. But well, to kind of partially answer that question for you, June, let me just state this. In the last 2 years, I've talked to two women. One of them is a professor at Boulder. One of them is a professor at Marquette. One of us is involved in environmental design, and the others in insects and in bees. And I can't remember exactly what they call them, entomologist.
Yep.
They have built a smart box for hibernation for bees. Mm-hmm. Each one basically costs $30,000. They sell for 40. They cost $20,000 to build. They're selling them for $30,000. And I said to them, how many beekeepers can afford $30,000 out the door? You know, and it's more industrial bee farms, right? It's not your local, you know, I want to save the planet bee people of 5 hives. And they put these out on trucks. That's what kind of made me think of it. And what they're doing is, right now, these people are purchasing them, and they're getting a subscription with it, because these two women, they actually do all the monitoring of the beehives during the dormant season. So they know that they can't sustain just receiving an income off of leasing these machines. But they also know that their customers don't have the ability for an immediate CapEx to buy 10 units for $300,000.
Yes.
So they would like some interim financing, and we've actually worked with them on the idea of creating this managed device concept on their behalf. So that's just one example. We have another example in California where they've created a better mousetrap for energy baseload. It's called, I think it's called current power. And think of a windmill that's normally out in the desert with high winds, but the winds can fluctuate, and therefore your baseload is not going to be constant. But these are turned upside down, and then they have a generator up top that sits on a barge, and all it does is keep spinning based on current, ocean currents. So you're going to get a constant baseload. But each one of those units that have been developed have a cost to different parts of the hardware. Well, their end customer is going to be a utility. They're going to want to participate in that, but they don't want to pay for that piece of equipment up front. So again, you can apply the managed device model where current power is going to supply all of the infrastructure for them, and then they're going to use the managed device model to go forward. The point being that whether it's with electronic type, as you talk about, or any other system, having these conversations makes somebody like me wildly enthusiastic about what we can produce as a country and as a person of interest and of innovation.
And I
So
think especially in the climate space where a lot of what's being built is really expensive machinery to some extent, I think your model makes terrific sense. And I would love to talk to you further because I look at a lot of climate companies. And then also, I think do you know, I recently did an event with Tiber Tot at Aramco Ventures, and they just launched a $1.5 billion sustainability fund. And I think this is, and they're investing into startups and, you know, equipment, and they're also investing into startups and companies that will also upgrade and change their own infrastructure, improve their own infrastructure, right? So I'd be happy to introduce you, and maybe I think he might be very interested in this.
great. Yeah, no, I welcome it. Like I said, I just need to continue to learn and investigate many more types of these technologies. And again, I could go on with another 36 examples of outfits that are doing something similar. Some of them are very early stages where they can't utilize the funding yet. Some of them are too advanced where they've got in-house funding, or they're in a Series A or a Series D type of round where they don't need it. But you know, it's a large world out there, and there's a lot of innovation going on. And certainly from your perspective, being, you know, kind of out in that the Western area, you have a better feel in Silicon Valley than maybe us to a degree in Chicago.
I'm actually in New York.
Oh, okay.
But you know, what's interesting is that I think even companies that have raised and are a little later stage, I find that a lot of startups are not very creative about their revenue streams. So I currently have a company that I pivoted from an app company into a transportation data company. And with the transportation data aspect, and then we redid their pricing on her app, she's going to hit her 5-year projections in like half the time, revenue projections in half the time, right? Which, you know, increases the valuation, increases the investability of startups. And I think for startups, if they're smart, and if the investors are smart, they would want to possibly, for certain startups, apply this kind of model as an additional revenue stream, right?
Yep.
I think it could be very interesting. I would love to, I want to talk further with you about how we can maybe work together on doing this.
Sure. And I think you speak to a very important point. When I spoke with the gentleman who run this EXIM group for the mass spectrometers, we had dinner this summer, and he said to me, "Oh, by the way, NASA just gave us a $500,000 grant to take our mass box and put it on the International Space Station." And I'm like, At what point were you going to jump up on the soapbox and just kind of not make it and also mentioned, you know?
Right.
But the point also is the fact that these guys are brilliant people in many different ways that I am not. I might have a little bit more expertise in something that they don't have. So I don't want my mass spectrometer guy to know how to financially model a reoccurring revenue.
Exactly.
I want to teach
Exactly.
them how to do that aspect of it and let them continue to run with what they know best. And
Yeah,
so, to
I've
your
talked to a
point,
few commercialization programs, and they're all like, we're going to tell the researchers to go out and talk to customers. I'm like, why? They've earned very expensive degrees. That's a real waste of time. Why don't we get like business students to do that work for them and surround them with cheaper business people? Because business schools are graduating them by the dozens.
yeah, yeah. No, this is so true in so many different ways.
Yeah. Sorry, I don't mean to suck up all the time. Sorry.
Thanks, June. Yes, I know that we're kind of past the initial 30 minutes, but I think we need more time for this such a exciting session. But I guess we maybe we reach out for the last perhaps the last question if that's okay with Xerxes and everyone.
Sure,
Yeah,
sure.
right. Any other questions left?
How
Right.
can people communicate with you, Xerxes? Should they reach out to you through LinkedIn
You know,
or?
you can feel free to share my contact information. You have my email address and all my contact information. Again, I am Chicago based. I'm on the north side. For those that are on either coast, I do have a daughter out at Santa Clara, so I forgive the lack of connection. There isn't much of a rivalry between the two. It's kind of, you know, David and Goliath, but she enjoys being out in Santa Clara. And so I do get out there often. And I'm also actually in New York a lot with some very close family. But I really appreciate your time. And again, Marwan, thank you for setting this up. It couldn't have happened without all of your expertise and guidance. But you have all my contact information and I'm an open book. I'll talk to anybody anytime, as long as it's advancing the concept of how we can connect the dots and apply what we do to any other industry or any other group that is looking at this type of more what I would just call creative financing.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. We really appreciate it, Xerxes. And we'll be in touch. So thank you very much, everyone. And
Marwan, was there an
recording-
FAQ that was developed that might be available to people? Wasn't there a couple of things that you worked on with Xerxes that might be of value in terms of information that didn't get covered in the call?
As part of what we do, actually, we do have a reflection that we publish on our LinkedIn
I see. Okay.
group. If you didn't join us, please feel free to join us. There's so many exciting and very interesting, innovative, related finance subject that we discussed there. You could join us there. You're gonna find the reflection. We also have a recording, which is a YouTube channel. You can subscribe to that one, and we'll be more than happy to also, communicate individually and share anything that you need, either to communicate with someone from the group, or if you need any specific subjects that we might actually have people that could talk about. So with that, thank you all for joining, and until our next speaker series.
Great.
All right.
Okay. Thank you
Thanks
very
for
much.
putting it together. I
You're
thought it was very professionally done and put together. I'm happy to be part of it, even though I kept my mouth shut. So, which is
Thank you
unusual,
also.
as you all would know.
That's what made it so professional.
Thank you, Herder, for presentation.
Thank
I
you.
have a last
Thank
minute
you.
question.
Yes.
So it sounds really interesting the way that you look for different business on finding these specific machines. But I'm wondering why, if you find one specific machine to develop your business, why don't you try to replicate that one in many states or countries instead of looking for new approaches? That could be my question.
That's actually a very good question, and it has come up often. And my answer is simply this. Given the fact that we're currently involved in, let's just call it 4 silos for simplicity: MRIs, SCADA, mass spectrometers, and the robotics side of things. We believe that those are growth opportunities that future funding is going to help continue with. It doesn't preclude us, it doesn't stop us, and it hasn't stopped us from talking to every one of June's type of contacts for the future, right?
Okay.
Whether it's CP, we're constantly looking at other verticals to look at. But you could also make the argument that once you've rinsed and repeated enough in a few areas, why not focus there? Because you've actually eliminated some of the inherent risk from something that you hadn't done before. So you have to kind of play both sides. We want to expand our base. We want to be deep within our verticals, but we also want to get wider. We never want to be an inch deep or an inch deep and a mile wide, and we never want to be, an inch wide and a mile deep and take that kind of selling to Walmart risk. So it's a gradual kind of, really it's portfolio management back to my old days, where you're balancing between how much exposure do you want to have to each, and how much of a differentiation is there to owning, Apple, a lot of Apple, or a blue chip company in today's day and age, versus going with a startup that's just developed a technology that you're taking a risk on. So yes, we absolutely love to look at everything under the sun. Eventually we might add more to the portfolio at that point, but at the same time, we're going to stay with our strengths and what we know. And so it clearly is you have to look upriver to see where they're falling in, and you need to pull them out from the river as they're drowning down below. So it's not a one or the other answer, it's a combination of both.
Okay. Thank you for the answer.
Great points. Thank you so much. It's such a great pleasure to meeting you to all in Xerxes, and thanks Marwan for this great initiative. All right.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Everybody-
Thank
Have a
you,
great evening.
Cortez.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marwan. Thank you,
Thank
Nasser.
you.
Bye.
Bye.